In this video, you'll learn all about working with plastic canvas for cross stitch. Hey there, this is Sarah with Notorious Needle, empowering you to stitch what you want with radical cross stitch design. By the end of this video, you'll learn numerous tips and tricks about how to use plastic canvas for your cross stitch project. For this demonstration, I'll be using 14 count clear perforated plastic, a size 24 tapestry needle, and embroidery floss. Some of the advantages of using plastic canvas instead of cloth like Aida cloth or linen is that it holds its shape. It's pretty stiff, which means it's perfect for 3D projects. That also means that if your tension is too tight, it won't skew the stitches. They'll always be straight. When using plastic canvas or perforated plastic, it's important to know that you can't use a hoop. Because it's so stiff, it won't really fit into an embroidery hoop. Also, while you're stitching on plastic canvas, you'll note that you can only bury the thread in the back. You can't use pin stitch to bury your thread, and you can't bury your tail of thread in the front because it makes the stitches pop up. That might look cool for a certain effect, but most of the time you'll want your stitches to be nice and smooth, which means only burying the thread in the back when you're done. The difference between plastic canvas and perforated plastic is that plastic canvas has square holes and perforated plastic has circular holes. Perforated plastic is better for cross stitch because the holes are circular. With plastic canvas and the square holes tend to snag on the thread just a little bit, and your thread will hug the corners, which means that if you don't use enough threads for each stitch, sometimes you can develop a little hole in the middle of your X's. That's why perforated plastic with the circular holes is better, but you can still use either. You may need to use one needle size smaller than you normally use. The plastic is unforgiving and it won't move aside like cloth will as you're pulling the needle through. You'll want to make sure that you prep the floss. You'll need to separate each strand on its own before recombining them and using them to stitch. And I show you how to do that in another video. The link will be below. My patterns recommend more strands of floss for full coverage so that the plastic doesn't peek through, but no matter what you do at the joints and the corners, a little bit of the plastic will peek through. Plastic canvas can be found in a multitude of colors, but so far for perforated plastic, which is the one with the circular holes and tends to come in smaller counts, I've only found white or clear, and either of those work for almost everything, so you're golden. When stitching with plastic canvas or perforated plastic, you'll want to make sure that you don't drag the threads across the cut lines. For this monarch butterfly pattern that I've created, you'll notice on the back that I did not carry the thread across the center. And that's because in the pattern, this will be cut and sewn back together. So if you carry the thread across the cut lines, you end up cutting the thread and then your stitches will unravel. So you'll want to make sure that you end the thread inside each cut and don't carry the thread across the cut lines. When cutting the plastic, you'll want to count the bars, not the stitches. The reason is because you need to leave at least one bar on the outside of every stitch. So, when stitching this monarch butterfly, you'll want to count from this bar all the way out to this bar before cutting it out. That way, you don't end up snipping over here on this edge, which might cause your stitches to unravel, or even snipping too close to this edge here down the center, because these edges are used later as either a border or to join them together. If you're not sure, you can always just stitch the whole thing on the plastic canvas without cutting it first, making sure you leave at least 2 bars in between any cut line. When you cut plastic canvas or perforated plastic, you'll want to cut as close to the bar as possible. if I cut just straight down the middle here, and I'm just using standard embroidery scissors, you'll notice that the edge has these little bumps where the holes used to be. So if you find that's the case, you'll need to go back and trim the bumps, trim the little nubs that stick out, because you don't want them to get caught on your thread later when either you're joining the pieces together or you're finishing the edges. All the little nubs are cut, and this is relatively smooth. This is smooth enough, I promise. If your scissors won't cut this close, you can even use a nail file to go ahead and file down those edges to make them nice and smooth for your stitches later. I'm going to go ahead and cut out the rest of this pattern. For the monarch butterfly pattern, I've stitched the butterfly and cut out around, cut the pattern out around the stitches, making sure to leave at least one bar around each of the stitches. On this half, I've gone ahead and cut and relatively smoothed out the edges, with a few exceptions that I need to go back over. And I've also cut the corners here a little bit on each of these edges, and on this side I haven't cut those corners yet, so let me show you how I did that. You take your embroidery scissors. You could even do this with an X-Acto knife or a nail file. The nail file will take the longest, but embroidery scissors or an X-Acto knife work, and you just snip off the edges. Start with less, and then if you don't like it, you can snip off more. But of course, if you snip off too much, you can't add any back. So it's all right to go over this a couple of times. I have to get my finger. So that looks good. I'm gonna flip it over because I'm right-handed and snip off the other side here. Snipping off the corners will help you finish this later when we finish off the edges. It makes it easier, gives it a smoother, more rounded look for these pretty butterfly wings. Alright. The finished cut out, well, not finished, the cut out monarch butterfly pattern. Let me show you how to put these guys together. For the monarch butterfly, I recommend that you put the front sides together, not the back side, and you're going to line up the holes so that they all match along this inside edge right here. Now I am using 4 threads on 14 count plastic canvas. I like to use 4 threads for 2 reasons, because it's easier to do the loop start, and because I like full coverage on these plastic canvas projects so that as little plastic canvas shows through the thread as possible. But I will show you how to do this joining stitch without loop start if you want to use 3 threads. You're going to put your needle in between the 2 pieces lined up and put your needle through only one of them. That way the tail of the thread is in between the pieces. And then go back through both sides, like so. Pull the needle through, and then continue on pulling your needle through. You're going to go through each hole twice. So when you're doing the joining stitch, if you have a nice flat edge like this, you go through each hole twice. If you go through only once, it will end up pulling the canvas one stitch off, but by going through twice, again, you get full coverage of the canvas, but also it keeps it aligned. So that's once and twice. If you encounter a corner, and it is an outside corner, you'll want to go through 3 times, and you'll be able to, because you will have stitched only one X on the canvas. And if you encounter an inside corner, you only need to go through it once with this joining stitch. So I'm going to take the time and finish the rest of this edge, and I will see you on the other side. So here I am at the end of putting these 2 pieces together and connecting them with the joining stitch. I started at the top, at the head of the little butterfly, and now I've ended up at the tail. And I still have floss left over. So I'm going to use that floss to then finish the edges. Next I will show you overstitch. Guys, overstitch is the same as joining stitch, but instead of putting pieces of canvas together, you're only going over the edge. And just like joining stitch, you want to do, let's see, we'll go this way so you can see the front top of the butterfly, which is prettier. You'll go through the corners 3 times, the outer corners 3 times, so that's 1, 2, 3, and then these straight edges, you'll go through each hole twice. I'm going to continue on the straight edge until I can show you the inner corner. Here we've arrived at an inner corner, and you only need to do the overstitch or the joining stitch if you were putting 2 pieces together once. And next we have an outer corner, and for that we'll go through 3 times. Continue on like that all the way around the edge of this butterfly. Remember that sometimes the corners are just going to stick out, and that's okay. That's part of the project, especially if you have corners joining more than 2 pieces of plastic canvas, such as a cube. In a cube, you've got 3 sides coming together, and you're going to get the little corner of the joint sticking out. That's okay. That happens. The finished stitched monarch butterfly on plastic canvas. The front and the back. I'm going to glue some magnets to the back of my monarch butterfly and make it into a refrigerator magnet, because why not? You could do whatever you want with it. If you'd like to learn a super neat trick about how to separate your embroidery floss without getting it tangled, there's a video here for it. And if you'd like to learn more about cross stitch, there's a playlist here. Stitch on.